No one could handle the Black Millionaire's twin daughters, until a single mom janitor did the impossible. The fluorescent lights of the Vance Tower lobby hummed a lonely, sterile song, casting long, distorted shadows on the polished marble floors. Alara Hayes pushed a mop across the vast, empty expanse, her movements a rhythmic dance of exhaustion. Every muscle in her back ached, a familiar fire that had been her constant companion for years. In the corner, nestled on a pile of their own threadbare coats, her 6-year-old son, Leo, slept, his small face serene in the harsh artificial light. It was almost 3 in the morning. She looked at his peaceful form, a pang of guilt and fierce love warring in her chest. This was no place for a child. But the cost of a babysitter was a luxury she couldn't afford, not when half her paycheck went to the tiny, drafty apartment they called home, and the other half was a constant, desperate calculation of groceries versus utility bills. Leo stirred, his eyelids fluttering open. "Mommy, are you done yet?" he whispered, his voice thick with sleep. She forced a smile, her heart cracking. "Almost, sweet boy. Go back to sleep." He sat up, rubbing his eyes, and looked at her with an unnerving clarity. "You didn't eat your dinner. I saw you put it in my lunchbox for tomorrow. How could a life so small hold a heart so big? And what would happen to that heart if she, its sole protector, finally broke under the weight of it all?" Julian Vance stared at the city lights from his penthouse office on the 80th floor, but he didn't see them. The panoramic view of the glittering metropolis, a testament to his empire, felt like a window into a void. He saw only the reflection of a man hollowed out by grief. On his desk, a sleek silver frame held the smiling face of his late wife, Amelia. Beside it, a stack of reports from the city's most exclusive nanny agency detailed the latest failure. "Incorrigible," one report read. "Hostile and withdrawn," said another. "Professionally, I must advise that the girls require therapeutic intervention, not a governess," concluded the most recent, from a woman who had lasted less than 48 hours. His twin daughters, Maya and Mia, were 7 years old, and they had terrorized and dismissed every qualified caretaker he had hired in the 2 years since Amelia's death. They were building a fortress around their shared grief, and he, their father, didn't have the key. He felt like a failure in the one job that truly mattered. With a sigh of frustration, he minimized the reports and idly clicked on the building's live security feed, a habit he developed to monitor the vast, silent kingdom he commanded. He usually scanned the empty corridors and server rooms, but tonight, his eyes locked on the lobby. He saw a woman, her face etched with a weariness that seemed to seep into her very bones, mopping the floor. And in the corner, a small boy was now awake, talking to her. Julian zoomed in. He couldn't hear their words, but he could see the interaction with perfect clarity. He saw the woman kneel, her expression softening into one of pure, undiluted love. He saw the boy reach out and touch her cheek. He saw her wrap him in a hug that seemed to shield him from the cold, empty world around them. For a moment, the sterile air in his office seemed to thicken, and an unfamiliar ache bloomed in his chest. It wasn't pity. It was a profound, startling recognition of something he had lost. A genuine human connection, unburdened by wealth or expectation. He watched as she shared a small, wrapped sandwich with the boy, breaking it in half with painstaking care. He made a decision. It was illogical, impulsive, and completely out of character. He stood up, straightened his tie, and strode towards his private elevator, his expensive Italian shoes silent on the plush carpet. He was going to the lobby. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and Alara looked up, startled. A man stood there, tall and impeccably dressed in a suit that probably cost more than her rent for a year. She recognized him instantly from the portraits in the building. Julian Vance, the king of this castle. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Was she in trouble for having Leo here? She had been warned. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice barely a whisper, her hands tightening on the mop handle. Leo scrambled behind her, peering around her legs with wide, curious eyes. Julian's gaze wasn't angry. It was intense, analytical and surprisingly gentle. He looked from her to Leo, his expression unreadable. "You are Elara Hayes," he stated. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir. And this is your son, Leo." "I'm sorry, sir. He wasn't feeling well, and I couldn't—" "I know the policy," she braced for the inevitable. The cold dismissal that would send them back into the unforgiving night without a job. Instead, Julian knelt, bringing himself down to eye level with Leo. The expensive fabric of his trousers creased on the freshly mopped floor. "Hello, Leo," he said, his voice a low, calm rumble. "It's a pleasure to meet you." Leo, usually shy, stepped out from behind his mother. "Hello," he said softly. "Are you the boss of this whole building?" Julian allowed a small, tired smile to touch his lips. Something like that. He rose to his full height and looked at Elara, his gaze direct. "Ms. Hayes, I have a proposition for you. It's unconventional. I require a caretaker for my twin daughters. The position comes with a significant salary, full benefits, and lodging. I want you to consider it." Elara stared at him, bewildered. A janitor? Offered a nanny position for a millionaire's children? It made no sense. It felt like a trap, or worse, pity. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice finding a sliver of its strength. "I appreciate the thought, but I'm a cleaner, not a nanny. I'm not qualified, and I can't accept charity." Her pride, worn and battered as it was one of the few things she had left. Julian's expression didn't flicker. "This is not charity. I have seen the reports from a dozen qualified professionals. Qualification, it seems, has nothing to do with what my children need. I saw you with your son. That is the qualification I am interested in. As for the lodging, it's a practical matter. The position is live-in." He saw the refusal still hardening in her eyes, the proud set of her jaw. He decided to tell her a sliver of the truth. "My daughters, they are not easy. They have lost their mother. They are lost. I am offering you a job, Ms. Hayes. A difficult one. I am asking for your help." The carefully constructed wall of corporate power crumbled for just a second, and in its place, she saw a desperate father. It was a look she knew well. She saw it in her own reflection every morning. It wasn't about the money, or the mansion, or the escape from her current life. It was the raw plea in his eyes, the silent cry for help for his children. That she understood. For Leo, she would do anything. Maybe, just maybe, she could do the same for two other lost children. "Okay, Mr. Vance," she said, the words feeling foreign on her tongue. "I'll try." The Vance mansion was less a home and more a monument to exquisite taste and profound emptiness. It was a sprawling contemporary structure of glass and white stone, filled with abstract art and minimalist furniture. Every surface gleamed. Every corner was silent. The silence was the first thing Elara noticed. It was heavy, oppressive, a stark contrast to the constant noise and life of her cramped apartment building. A stern-faced housekeeper named Mrs. Gable showed them to their rooms, a suite, really, larger than their entire apartment, with a soft bed for her and an adjoining room with a rocket ship-themed bed for Leo. Leo was in awe, his eyes wide as he touched the plush carpet and peered out the floor-to-ceiling window at the manicured gardens. Elara, however, felt a knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. This felt like a gilded cage, and she was an imposter. The introduction to the twins happened in a playroom that looked like it had been designed by a magazine editor but never touched by a child. Toys were arranged in perfect, color-coded rows. Books were lined up with military precision. Maya and Mia stood in the center of the room, identical in matching navy blue dresses, their dark hair pulled back in severe ponytails. They had their father's intense eyes and a solemnity that was jarring on faces so young. "Girls, this is Ms. Hayes. And this is her son, Leo," Julian said, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous room. "They will be staying with us for a while." Maya, who seemed to be the leader, looked Elara up and down with a cool, dismissive gaze. Mia simply stared at the floor, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. They said nothing, not a word. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. Elara knew better than to force it. She had learned from Leo that trust was a seed, not a switch. You couldn't just flip it on. You had to plant it, water it, and give it time to grow in the dark. It's very nice to meet you both, Alara said softly. This is a beautiful playroom, more silence. Days bled into a week, and the pattern held. The girls would ignore her. They would eat the food she prepared in silence, move like ghosts through the massive house, and respond to her gentle questions with monosyllabic grunts or, more often, nothing at all. They treated her like she was part of the furniture, another inanimate object in their sterile world. Alara didn't push. She cleaned, she cooked, she organized. She created a quiet, steady rhythm of care around them. She learned they liked their sandwiches cut into triangles, not squares. She learned Mia was afraid of thunder and that Maya secretly read fantasy novels long after her bedtime. She learned these things through observation, not conversation. The breakthrough, when it came, was not from her but from Leo. He was immune to the oppressive silence and the cold shoulders. He saw two girls who looked lonely. One afternoon, he sat at the small table in the playroom, his tongue sticking out in concentration as he scribbled with his crayons. The girls were on the other side of the room, building a tower of blocks with grim determination. Leo finished his drawing, a wobbly but vibrant picture of a bright yellow sun with a huge, lopsided smile. He walked over to the girls, his small hand holding out the piece of paper. "This is for you," he said to Mia, the quieter of the two. Mia flinched, as if expecting to be rebuked. Maya shot Leo a glare that could have frozen fire. "We don't want your stupid drawing." Leo's face fell for a second, but he didn't retreat. He just held it out further. "It's a happy sun," he explained simply, "because your room is kind of dark." He placed the drawing on the floor beside their tower and walked away. The girls didn't acknowledge it. But later that evening, when Alara went to tuck Mia into bed, she saw it. The small, wobbly drawing of the happy sun was propped up on Mia's nightstand, a tiny splash of defiant color in the perfectly curated gray room. It was the first crack in the fortress. The drawing of the sun became a silent talisman. Mia never mentioned it, but it remained on her nightstand, a small beacon of warmth. A few days later, Alara found the twins huddled in a window seat in the library, a room so vast it felt more like a public institution. They were bent over a large, leather-bound photo album, their small fingers tracing the images. Alara hesitated, not wanting to intrude, but she saw the glistening tracks of tears on Mia's cheeks. Maya was stoic, but her knuckles were white where she gripped the edge of the book. Alara approached softly, not as a nanny or a housekeeper, but just as another person in the room. She glanced down at the open page. It was a photo of Julian and a woman with a radiant, infectious smile, the same smile from the frame on his desk. Amelia. She was holding two tiny, swaddled babies, one in each arm. "Your mother was very beautiful," Alara said quietly, her voice full of simple, honest admiration. Maya looked up, her eyes flashing with a defensive fire, ready to tell her to leave. But something in Alara's tone, something devoid of pity or platitude, made her pause. "Her smile," Alara continued, looking at Mia. "It looks just like yours when you think no one is watching." Mia's head snapped up, her eyes wide with surprise. No one had ever said she looked like her mother. People always said she looked like her father. The comparison, so direct and gentle, seemed to bypass her defenses. She didn't smile, but the tension in her small shoulders eased almost imperceptibly. "She used to read to us in this window," Maya said, her voice a small, rusty thing from disuse. She said it was a magic portal to other worlds. It was the most she had ever said to Alara, an offering, a piece of their sacred past, shared with an outsider. "My mom used to say that about books too," Alara replied softly. "She said they were the cheapest way to travel the world." She didn't press further. She just stood with them for a moment in shared silence, acknowledging their grief without trying to fix it. Later that night, long after the children were asleep, Alara was in the kitchen, wiping down the counters. The house was finally still. She heard footsteps and turned to see Julian standing in the doorway. He looked exhausted, the weight of his empire and his lonely home pressing down on him. "I heard what you said to them," he said, his voice low. In the library, Ilara felt a flush of embarrassment. I hope I didn't overstep. Overstep. He walked further into the room, leaning against the marble island. Ilara, you are the first person they have willingly spoken to about their mother in 2 years. The first person. Their therapists, their grandparents, me, we all try, and they just shut down. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of profound frustration. I don't know how to reach them. Every time I look at them, I see her. It's like a constant reminder of what I've lost. And I think they can feel that. They feel my pain, and it just adds to their own. It's a wall I can't seem to break down. He looked at her, his usual guarded expression gone, replaced by a raw, aching vulnerability. Amelia, she was the light, the architect of our joy. She planned every party, remembered every birthday, kissed every scraped knee. The accident, it wasn't just a car crash. Felt like the sun going out. I've just been stumbling in the dark ever since, trying to pretend I know the way for their sake. His voice cracked on the last words, and he looked away, staring at his own faint reflection in the dark kitchen window. Ilara's heart went out to him. She saw past the billionaire, past the powerful CEO, and saw a man drowning in grief, just trying to keep his children's heads above water. You can't replace their mother's light, Mr. Vance, she said, her voice gentle but firm. But you can learn to see in the dark, and so can they. Sometimes, all it takes is a little flicker to show you you're not alone. He turned back to her, his dark eyes searching her face. You're that flicker, aren't you, Ilara? The question hung in the air between them, charged with a significance that went far beyond her job description. In that moment, the cavernous kitchen felt small, intimate. The invisible lines between employer and employee, between billionaire and janitor, began to blur, dissolving in a shared understanding of loss and the desperate hope for a new dawn. The atmosphere in the house began to change, slowly at first, then all at once. The heavy silence started to recede, replaced by the tentative sounds of life. It started with Mia asking Ilara to read her a bedtime story, the same one her mother used to read. Then it was Maya, begrudgingly asking for help with a school project, a diorama of her favorite fantasy world. Ilara helped her build tiny paper trees and a dragon out of clay, and for the first time, she heard Maya laugh, a real, uninhibited sound that echoed beautifully in the once silent halls. Leo was the catalyst, the bridge between their two worlds. He taught the girls how to make the perfect mud pie in the garden, a messy, joyful activity that horrified Mrs. Gable but made Julian smile when he saw the pictures Ilara sent him. He initiated epic hide-and-seek games that took them through every corner of the vast mansion, filling it with the sounds of running feet and shrieks of delight. One Friday night, Ilara suggested a movie night. The girls, who usually retreated to their rooms after dinner, hesitated and then agreed. She and the 3 children made a giant nest of blankets and pillows on the floor of the enormous media room. They made popcorn on the stove, the old-fashioned way, shaking the pan and listening for the pops, a simple magic the girls had never experienced. When Julian came home from work, he stopped in the doorway, unseen. The room was dark except for the flickering light of the animated movie on the screen. He saw his daughters, not in pristine dresses, but in comfortable pajamas, huddled together with Leo under a mountain of blankets. Ilara was with them, her arm around Mia, who was leaning her head on Ilara's shoulder. Popcorn was scattered on the floor, and the sound of his children's laughter filled the air. His chest tightened. This was what a home was supposed to sound like. This was the warmth he thought had died with Amelia. He had poured millions into this house, into art, into furniture, into every conceivable luxury. But it had taken this woman, with her quiet strength and her $500 a week paycheck, to turn it into a home. He stepped into the room. "What are we watching?" he asked, his voice softer than he intended. 3 heads popped up. "Dad!" Mia squealed, a genuine, happy sound that was still new to his ears. "We're watching The Dragon Prince's Quest. Is there room for one more?" he asked. "Yeah," Leo shouted, scooting over to make space. Julian took off his suit jacket, loosened his tie, and sat on the floor with them, sinking into the nest of blankets. He felt awkward at first, a stranger in his own home, in his own family. But as the movie played on, Maya leaned over and offered him the bowl of popcorn. Mia, on his other side, slowly, tentatively, rested her head against his arm. He felt a profound sense of peace settle over him, a feeling so foreign he had almost forgotten its existence. He looked over at Alara in the flickering light. She was watching the screen, a soft smile on her face, completely at ease. She wasn't just a caretaker. She was the heart that had started beating in the chest of his hollowed-out family. And as he sat there, with a daughter on each side, surrounded by the smell of popcorn and the sound of childish laughter, Julian Vance realized with a startling certainty that he was falling in love with her. The fragile peace of their new life was shattered by the unexpected arrival of a sleek, black town car. Out of it stepped Eleanor Vance, Julian's mother. She was a formidable woman, sculpted by wealth and societal expectation, with a spine of steel and a gaze that could wither orchids. She swept into the mansion like a conquering queen, her stilettos clicking an imperious rhythm on the marble floor. "Julian, darling," she announced, her voice carrying through the foyer. "I was in town and simply had to see my grandchildren." Her eyes scanned the entrance hall, taking in the small pair of muddy boots belonging to Leo and a brightly colored finger painting taped to the wall. A look of faint distaste crossed her features. Julian greeted her with a polite but strained hug. His relationship with his mother was complex. He respected her, but he had always chafed under her rigid expectations. The confrontation he had been dreading was now upon them. Eleanor's gaze landed on Alara, who was coming down the grand staircase with Leo. "And who is this?" she asked, her tone dripping with condescension. "Mother, this is Alara Hayes," Julian said, his voice firm. He put a subtle, protective hand on the small of Alara's back. "And her son, Leo. Alara has been helping with the girls." "Helping?" Eleanor's perfectly sculpted eyebrow arched. "I see." The new governess, she looked Alara up and down, her eyes lingering on her simple clothes. The unspoken words hung in the air. "You are the help. You do not belong." Throughout her visit, Eleanor was a master of subtle sabotage. She would praise the previous, properly credentialed nannies in front of Alara. She would talk loudly on the phone to her society friends about the importance of good breeding and maintaining standards. She bought the girls expensive, complicated gifts that made them feel pressured rather than happy, a stark contrast to the simple joy they found in baking cookies with Alara. The girls, who had just begun to blossom, started to retreat into their shells under their grandmother's icy scrutiny. They became quiet, withdrawn. The laughter faded. Eleanor saw this not as a result of her presence, but as proof of Alara's incompetence. The true crisis came during the week of the annual Vance Foundation Charity Gala, the pinnacle of the city's social calendar. It was an event Julian usually dreaded, but this year he had asked Alara to attend with him, not as an employee but as his date. He had bought her a simple but breathtakingly elegant midnight blue gown. For the first time, Alara saw herself not as a janitor or a struggling single mother, but as a beautiful, desirable woman. The night of the gala, Eleanor saw them descending the stairs together. Julian in his tuxedo, looking more relaxed than he had in years, and Alara, radiant and poised. Eleanor's face hardened into a mask of cold fury. This was no longer just about an inappropriate nanny. This was a threat to the Vance legacy. She saw a former janitor about to be presented to their world, and she would not allow it. At the gala, she moved through the glittering crowd like a shark, whispering in the ears of influential board members and gossiping with powerful society matrons. She painted a picture of a grieving, vulnerable son being taken advantage of by a cunning, low-class woman. Then, she made a call to a tabloid journalist she kept on a short leash, a man known for his ruthless ambition. The trap was set. The gala was a dizzying swirl of champagne, diamonds, and forced smiles. Alara felt deeply out of place, a simple sparrow in a flock of peacocks. But Julian held her hand, his touch a warm, steady anchor in the overwhelming sea of wealth and power. He introduced her to his colleagues not as the nanny, but simply as Alara, his voice filled with a pride and affection that made her cheeks flush and her heart soar. For a few hours, she allowed herself to live in the fairy tale. They were dancing, a slow waltz under the grand chandeliers, when the flash of a camera broke the spell. A slick-looking man with a microphone and a hungry glint in his eye pushed through the crowd, a cameraman in his wake. "Mr. Vance." Garrett Stone from City Beat. "A word for your readers." Julian's posture stiffened. He moved slightly, shielding Alara with his body. "Not now, Garrett." But the reporter was relentless. He angled the microphone towards Alara. "The whole city is buzzing, Mr. Vance. Word is you found comfort after your tragedy with a member of your domestic staff. Is it true this woman was the janitor in your building? What would your family, what would the late Mrs. Vance, think of such a relationship?" The question, loaded with insinuation and venom, exploded in the sudden silence. The music faltered. 100 pairs of eyes turned to them, filled with a mixture of shock, pity, and cruel curiosity. Alara felt the blood drain from her face. The beautiful gown felt like a costume, and she was just a janitor again, exposed and humiliated under the glare of 1,000 lights. Her every insecurity, every fear about their class difference, rushed to the surface. She wanted to run, to disappear, to take Leo and hide back in the anonymity of her old life where she at least belonged. She could feel Eleanor's triumphant gaze from across the room. This was her mother's doing. This public crucifixion was her checkmate. Julian's hand tightened on hers, a grip of steel. He didn't let go. He didn't look angry or embarrassed. He looked furious, but with a cold, controlled rage that was far more terrifying than any outburst. The crisis was here. The world was demanding he choose between his legacy and the janitor. He looked down at Alara, at her pale, frightened face, and his choice was never more clear. He saw not a janitor, but the woman who had saved him. The woman who had given his children back their laughter. The woman he loved. The world could be damned. Julian released Alara's hand for only a moment, stepping forward to take the microphone from the gala's stunned MC. The low murmur of the crowd died instantly. The only sounds were the clicks of cameras and the frantic whispers of the press. He stood on the low stage, every inch the powerful man he was, but his eyes were only on Alara. "You asked what my late wife would think," he began, his voice calm and clear, amplified throughout the vast ballroom. Every guest, every waiter, every journalist was frozen, listening. "My wife, Amelia, was the kindest, most compassionate person I have ever known. She believed that a person's worth was measured by the content of their character, not the size of their bank account or the title on their business card. She would be disgusted by your question, and by the cruel, classist implication behind it." He turned his gaze from the reporter and let it sweep across the room, finally landing on his mother, whose face had gone rigid with shock. "For 2 years, my family has lived in a beautiful, expensive house that was not a home. It was a mausoleum of grief. My children were lost, and I was failing them. We were surrounded by qualified people, by people from the right background, none of whom could reach them." He then looked back at Alara, and his voice softened, losing its hard edge of command and filling with a raw, undeniable emotion. "And then this woman came into our lives. Yes, she was a janitor. She worked all night cleaning this very building to provide for her son. She is the strongest, most decent, most loving human being I have ever met." He walked off the stage, back to her side, and took her hand again, pulling her gently to face the silent, watching crowd with him. "Alara Hayes didn't just clean my floors. She healed my children. She reminded me how to laugh. She brought the light back into my life. She rescued me. She is not my domestic staff, she is my partner. She is the woman I love. She is the future of my family." Gasps rippled through the ballroom. He ignored them. He looked directly at his mother, his eyes conveying a final, unyielding message. "And anyone," he said, his voice dropping to a steely, quiet declaration, family or otherwise, who cannot show her the profound respect and gratitude she deserves, will no longer have a place in our lives." He then turned to Alara, his back to the entire world, creating an intimate space just for the two of them amidst the stunned silence. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumb gently wiping away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "I love you, Elara," he whispered, for her alone to hear. And then, in front of the flashing cameras and the shocked high society of the entire city, he kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion, but one of profound commitment, a public sealing of his promise. The antagonist was not just defeated. She was rendered irrelevant. The world they had feared had been faced, and their love had been declared the victor. 1 year later, the sun streamed down on the vibrant green lawn of the Vance estate. The oppressive silence that had once defined the property was a distant memory, replaced by the sound of children's laughter and the gentle splashing of a sprinkler. Maya and Mia, now 8 years old and full of life, were chasing Leo through the jets of water, their shrieks of joy pure and uninhibited. They no longer wore severe, identical dresses but mismatched shorts and t-shirts, stained with grass and happiness. Elara sat on a large picnic blanket under the shade of a magnificent oak tree, watching them. She wore a simple summer dress, her face relaxed and glowing with a contentment she had once thought impossible. She was no longer a visitor in this life. She was its heart. Julian came and sat beside her, handing her a glass of lemonade. He had changed, too. The haunted, weary look in his eyes was gone, replaced by a deep, steady calm. He rarely wore his severe business suits at home anymore, preferring simple, comfortable clothes that made him seem more like a father and less like a CEO. He slipped his arm around her, and she leaned her head against his shoulder, a familiar, comfortable gesture. "Look at them," he said quietly, his voice filled with wonder. "They're just kids." "That's what they were all along," Elara replied softly. "They just needed permission to be happy again." He turned to look at her, his expression serious. "You gave them that permission. You gave me that permission." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. It wasn't large or ostentatious. Elara's heart did a little flutter kick. "I've been thinking about what a home is," he said, his voice a low, earnest rumble. "It's not stone or glass or expensive art. It's not a name or a legacy. I know that now. It's a feeling of safety. It's laughter in the kitchen. It's watching your children run through a sprinkler on a sunny afternoon." He opened the box. Inside was a simple, elegant ring with a single, perfect sapphire the color of her eyes. "My life began again the night I met you in that empty lobby. You and Leo, you rebuilt this family from the ashes. I don't want to be your employer or your partner anymore, Elara." He took her hand, his touch gentle but sure. "I want to be your husband. I want you to be my wife. I want us to be a family, officially, forever. Will you marry me?" Tears welled in Elara's eyes, tears of pure, unadulterated joy. She looked from his earnest face to the laughing children, her son and the daughters who had become her own, and she saw her entire world whole and perfect. "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, of course, yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly. It wasn't a symbol of his wealth, but a promise of their future. The children, noticing the sudden quiet, came running over, dripping and laughing. "What's happening?" Maya asked. Julian pulled Elara close, kissing her softly. "I asked your mom to marry me," he said, his voice full of happiness. "And she said yes." Mia and Maya cheered, throwing their wet arms around both of them in a group hug, with Leo squeezing in right in the middle. They were a chaotic, happy, beautiful mess, for in the quiet architecture of kindness, they had built a home far grander than any mansion, a love far more valuable than any fortune. If this heartwarming tale stirred your soul, please like, share, and subscribe for more soul-stirring stories that prove love is the greatest treasure of all.